Blood and ash dripped from Captain John Henry's battle-scarred armor as he stood chained before the Intergalactic Tribunal, accused of war crimes and genocide he swore were justified. "The defendant will rise," the tribunal chairman boomed. Henry stood, his eyes hard as flint. Karos, the Voth ambassador, snarled as he gestured to a holoscreen. Grainy footage played, showing Henry barking commands as human soldiers executed Voth prisoners and set huts ablaze. Waves of shock and outrage erupted from the alien delegates. Some screamed for Henry's head. The chairman gavelled for order. "Captain Henry, your plea." Bedlam exploded, Karos apoplectic. "You can't deny it, we all just saw—" "I don't deny my actions," Henry cut in, his gravelly voice silencing the chamber. "But I do deny they were war crimes. You want me dead, Karos. You went to a lot of trouble to capture me alive when you could have killed me in combat. Then you put on this circus, expecting me to beg for mercy. We all know that's not happening." Henry faced the tribunal. "You will hear the truth before you condemn me. The parts Karos left out, how this war really began, what the Voth did to Earth, to my people, my family." He held each delegate's gaze unflinching. "Then you can judge if my choices were crime or justice, if you can stomach the truth." The chairman's gavel banged, the harsh sound cutting through the tribunal chamber. "Very well, Captain Henry. Speak your piece, but know that it changes nothing of the evidence presented against you thus far." Henry gave a curt nod, his chains clinking as he shifted his stance. 20 years ago, the Voth made first contact with humanity, but it wasn't a peaceful meeting between equals. Their warships appeared suddenly in Earth orbit, darkening our skies. They didn't come to talk or to trade, they came to conquer. His voice took on a hard edge. The Voth commander delivered an ultimatum: surrender immediately and submit to Voth rule or face annihilation. He claimed that it was the Voth's right, no, their divine mandate, to dominate lesser species such as ourselves. Humanity barely had a chance to process what was happening before the deadline passed, and the Voth opened fire. Henry's eyes unfocused slightly as he recalled the memories. "I watched from my base outside Denver as the Voth's orbital bombardment began. They targeted every major city, every center of industry or government. Millions died in seconds as the particle beams and plasma bombs rained down, reducing our civilization to rubble." His fists clenched. "My base was hit by a glancing shot from a Voth destroyer. The blast wave crumpled the walls like tinfoil and sent shrapnel scything through the air. I barely survived, pulled from the wreckage by my squad mates. We watched helplessly as Denver burned on the horizon, and Voth dropships descended on the ruins." Henry looked up, meeting the eyes of the delegates. That was just the beginning. In the following weeks and months, I saw the depths of the Voth's cruelty firsthand. Their troops patrolled the shattered streets of our cities, gunning down anyone who so much as looked at them wrong. They burned our crops and poisoned our water, trying to starve us into submission. Thousands of humans were rounded up and shipped off-world to labor in Voth mines and factories, nothing more than slaves. His voice shook with barely suppressed rage. "My own brother was executed by a Voth firing squad. His crime? Scavenging food from the ruins of a grocery store to keep our family from starving. He was only 16 years old." Henry took a shuddering breath. "I joined the resistance, along with anyone else who refused to bow to Voth tyranny. We fought with whatever weapons we could scavenge or steal, but we were outmatched. The Voth had energy shielding, plasma rifles, battle drones. We had a few rifles and improvised explosives. Every engagement saw my comrades cut down by the dozen." His shoulders slumped. Eventually, Earth's surviving leaders surrendered to the Voth. They claimed it was the only way to save our species from extinction, but some of us refused to live on our knees. We fled the planet with whatever ships and weapons we'd managed to capture, and took the fight to the Voth across 100 star systems. Henry laughed bitterly. For years we waged a guerrilla war from the shadows, bleeding the Voth where we could, raiding their supply depots, freeing human slaves, sabotaging their ships. But it was never enough. The Voth's hold on our world only grew stronger. They lined the streets with crucified human resistors as a warning. A single tear tracked through the grime on Henry's face. Then the Voth murdered my parents, processed them into nutrient sludge in one of their organic reclamation centers, as punishment for my treasonous activities against the hegemony. Cries of dismay and revulsion echoed through the chamber at this. Henry paid them no mind, his eyes hard as flint once more. That was when I realized that the Voth would never stop, that they'd keep humanity under their boot forever unless someone, somewhere, fought back. So I led my band of rebels in a campaign to bring the war to the Voth's own worlds. We'd capture their ships, steal their technology, turn it against them. A fierce grin split his face. It took a decade of blood and toil and sacrifice, but we did it. We built a fleet, an army, strong enough to challenge the Voth's hold on our system. We fought them in the skies above Earth, in the deserts of Mars, on the moons of Jupiter. We showed them that humanity would never ever stop fighting for our freedom, no matter the odds against us. His voice rang out. After 10 long years and billions of human lives lost, we watched the Voth flee our solar system in disarray. On that day I made a vow, that I would hunt them to the ends of the universe, that I would make them pay 1,000-fold for every atrocity they had inflicted upon us, that humanity would never again cower before alien tyranny. We would forge our own destiny among the stars, even if we had to do it atop a mountain of Voth corpses. I swore that I would do whatever it took to ensure a free future for my species. Henry spread his manacled hands, encompassing the tribunal. So go ahead. Judge me, condemn me, execute me, it doesn't matter. The Voth sowed the seeds of their own destruction when they tried to grind us beneath their heel. My actions at Zelos 5 and 100 other worlds were just me keeping the promise I made when I watched them flee like whipped dogs from the cradle of humanity. I have done what I had to do to protect my people from annihilation, and I would do it all again. Henry's words hung in the air, a damning indictment of Voth atrocities that Karos could not refute. The Voth ambassador's face contorted in barely restrained fury, his clawed fists clenching spasmodically. "This is outrageous," Karos sputtered, his voice shaking with rage. "I will not sit here and be lectured on morality by a mass murderer. The defendant's feeble attempts to justify his crimes by casting aspersions on the Voth are nothing more than the desperate lies of a guilty man seeking to escape justice." Henry rounded on Karos, his eyes blazing with contempt. "You want to talk about crimes, Karos? Let's talk about the Zelos system. 3 guesses who the Voth attacked and enslaved after they were driven off Earth? I'll give you a hint. It wasn't humans." Karos's scales flushed crimson, but Henry pressed on relentlessly. "The Krill, a peaceful agrarian species that had never raised a hand in violence. They weren't a threat to anyone, but that didn't stop you from conquering their worlds and working them to death in your minds, did it?" With a tap of a button, Henry activated the holoprojector built into the center of the tribunal chamber. The image of a Krill shimmered into view above the dais, a slender, iridescent being with large, compound eyes that regarded the assembled delegates with a gentle, curious gaze. "This is Jacon," Henry said, his voice rough with emotion. "He was the leader of a Krill rebel cell. I know because my men and I fought alongside him for months. We attacked Voth mining operations and liberated Krill slave camps together." The holoprojection shifted, displaying a younger, unscarred Henry standing side by side with Jacon on the surface of a Krill world. They had their fists raised in a gesture of solidarity before a cheering crowd of Krill onlookers. "The Krill looked to humanity as proof that the Voth could be beaten," Henry said. "Jacon and we made a pact, humans and Krill, standing together against Voth oppression. We swore that we would fight until both our species were free." Henry's expression darkened, his eyes distant. "I'm sure you can guess how the Voth responded to that little alliance, Karos." With another tap, the holoprojector displayed a new image. Alien onlookers gasped in shock and revulsion. Jacon's severed head was mounted on a steel pike, his once vibrant eyes dull and lifeless, planted before the smouldering ruins of a Krill village. Blackened Krill corpses were strewn about like broken dolls, many hideously mutilated. "Jacon was my friend," Henry said, his voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. He had a mate, 3 offspring. The Voth made him watch as they skinned them alive, then tortured him for days before finally cutting off his head. Henry fixed Karos with a glare that could melt steel, his words dripping with loathing. I made a promise to Jekon as he lay dying in my arms. I swore that I would protect the Krill, that I would avenge him and ensure that his people would never again suffer under the boot of Voth tyranny. He gestured to the grisly scene still displayed on the holoprojector. So tell me, Karos, is it a war crime to fight against an enemy that does this? Is it genocide to visit destruction upon those who commit such atrocities? The tribunal chamber was utterly silent, the weight of Henry's words seeming to hang heavy in the air. After a long moment, the chairman cleared his throat and nodded for Henry to continue. Henry's voice cracked with grief as he recounted the aftermath of Jekon's brutal execution. With Jekon gone, the fight went out of the Krill. They'd lost their leader, their inspiration. The Voth fell on their worlds like a plague, slaughtering and enslaving. We fought like hell to save who we could, but it was a losing battle from the start. His eyes went distant, seeing again the horrors he had witnessed. In the end, the Krill made the only choice they could, the only way to be free. They'd planted charges deep in their homeworld's core, chose oblivion over living under the Voth's boot again. Henry's fists clenched, knuckles white. I watched from orbit as their planet cracked apart, continents shattering, oceans boiling away. 1 billion Krill voices crying out, and then silence. He slammed a fist against the arm of his chair, the crack echoing through the tribunal chamber. And where was Earth? Where was the alliance that had sworn to stand with the Krill? Bitterness dripped from every word. Oh, they were there. Admiral Valdez, so proud in his crisp uniform, beaming down to the surface to shake hands with the Voth commander, to sign their damned treaty while the cinders of Jekon's world drifted past the viewports. A vein pulsed in Henry's temple as he spat the words. They sold us out, sold out every species the Voth had massacred or enslaved, and for what? A scrap of paper, the promise that Earth alone would be spared? He surged to his feet, chains rattling. Valdez ordered me to stand down, surrender my ship, return to Earth like a good little soldier, while the Voth consolidated their hold on half the damned galaxy. A harsh laugh. Maybe not for him or the politicians safe on Earth, but I'd seen too much, lost too many friends to just walk away. If Earth wouldn't take the fight to the Voth, I'd do it myself. Henry spread his hands, encompassing his chained wrists. So I did. My crew and I, we went rogue, deserted. We raided every Voth outpost and colony we could reach, hit their supply lines, their shipyards, freed their slaves and left nothing but ash in our wake. He met Karos's furious gaze with a feral grin. How's that for disarray, you scaly bastard? The retribution punched far above her weight. Your kind had gotten soft, sloppy, used to stomping on primitives who couldn't fight back. Well, we could, and we did. The grin faded. But it cost us. The retribution was a tough old bird, but even she couldn't shrug off the pounding the Voth dished out forever. And my crew, the best men and women I ever served with. One by one, I lost them all. Henry's voice grew thick. Zalos was to be our last hurrah, one final strike to make the Voth howl. We all knew it was a one-way trip, but if we could take out their largest breeding facility in the sector, slow their advance even a little. He shook his head. It wasn't enough to save the Zalosians. Their ships were already burning by the time we hit the system. All we could do was make sure the Voth wouldn't be taking any slaves that day. Henry's eyes flashed with manic light. I set the Retribution on a collision course with the local star, overloaded her reactor, synced it with the solar core. When she hit, well, nothing in that system would be worrying about Voth occupation anymore. His shoulders slumped, the fire dimming. I didn't expect to be around to see it. Planned to go down fighting, take as many of the scaly bastards with me as I could, starting with their admiral. Just my luck that Karos got to the bridge first. Henry raised his manacled hands in a mocking salute to the fuming Voth ambassador. So here we are. You wanted me alive, Karos? You got me. Much good may it do you. In a few minutes, The retribution will reach the star, and Zelos will be free, the hard way. He smiled then, cold and sharp as a dagger. That's what you never understood about humans, Karos. We don't stop, we don't kneel, and we make our own fate, even if that means taking you down with us. Henry spread his arms wide, chains clinking. So what are you waiting for, Tribunal? Pass your judgment, put me against a wall, it won't matter. The Voth's days are numbered one way or another. You can kill me, but you can't kill what I stand for. You can't kill humanity's spirit. Henry's impassioned speech was cut short by a sudden commotion, erupting from the rear of the tribunal chamber. Shocked gasps and cries of alarm rang out as a bloodied, ragged figure staggered through the crowd, roughly shoving past the guards who tried to restrain him. The figure stumbled and fell to his knees, leaving a smeared trail of crimson on the polished floor. The footage, he coughed, fighting for breath. It's a fake. Through a haze of pain, Henry recognized the wounded alien. It was Tijan, the Zelosian ambassador. Henry had thought him dead, killed along with the rest of his people when the Voth attacked Zelos 5. Tijan struggled to pull himself upright, his torn and stained robes hanging off his emaciated frame. His large dark eyes were filled with desperation and agony as he faced the assembled delegates. The Voth orchestrated everything, Tijan gasped out through gritted teeth, staged the attack, framed Captain Henry to justify their invasion. The chamber erupted into fresh uproar, but Tijan raised his voice to be heard above the din, even as rivulets of dark blood leaked from the corners of his mouth. Zelos Phi never threatened them. We were peaceful. A racking cough doubled him over, but he pushed himself up again. When the Voth came, we fought back, but we were overmatched. Tijan met Henry's eyes, his anguished gaze boring into him. We sent a distress call begging for aid, Captain Henry, the only one who ever stood against the Voth. Henry remembered receiving that desperate plea, remembered the wrenching decision to abandon his self-imposed exile and make a final stand for a people who weren't his own. By the time the retribution arrived, Zelos was already falling, Tijan continued raggedly. Henry beamed us up, civilians, children. Then he went down, to sabotage the Voth command post. Give us a chance. The ambassador shook his head, fresh agony twisting his features. But the Voth knew it was a trap. They were waiting in numbers too great. Henry's men, they fought so bravely, but slaughtered, all slaughtered. Only Henry left, and Voth beat him down, dragged him away. Tijan pulled himself up to his full height with a final reserve of strength, his voice rising. I escaped. Had to tell the truth. Voth faked that video. Framed Henry. All a lie. A sizzling beam of blue-white energy suddenly speared through Tijan's chest from behind. The smell of seared flesh filled the air. Tijan crumpled, dead before he hit the ground. A smoking hole punched through his heart. Voth soldiers, armed and armored for war, stormed into the tribunal chamber. Pulse rifles barked and guards fell, cut down before they could even draw their weapons. Screams of terror filled the air as the Voth commandos swiftly seized control, herding the delegates at gunpoint like frightened sheep. Karos rose to his feet, his eyes gleaming with cruel amusement as he stalked toward Henry. Did you really think your puny warship could destroy Zelos? The Voth sneered. The Voth are the supreme power in the galaxy. With a gesture, Karos activated the chamber's holo display. An image flared to life. The retribution, trailing fire and venting atmosphere from a dozen grievous wounds, dwarfed before the looming bulk of a Voth dreadnought. As Henry watched in impotent rage, escape pods blasted free of the dying ship. Moments later, the retribution disappeared in a blinding flash as her reactor went critical. Your crew is now in our custody, Karos gloated. This whole trial a farce. A distraction while Voth fleets moved on your pathetic Earth. Even now they approach your homeworld, ready to burn it to ash as punishment for your defiance. The Voth commander leaned in close, his fetid breath washing over Henry. When Earth is nothing but a cinder, I will make your crew watch as I flay the skin from your bones. Your death will be a slow one, Human, and the Voth shall feast on your agonized screams." Something snapped inside Henry. An animal roar of fury tore from his throat as he flexed against his bonds with all his strength. The durasteel restraints shattered like glass. Henry launched himself at Karos, a lifetime of rage and grief fueling his attack. The Voth commander met him head-on, a vicious smile splitting his scaly face. They crashed together in a whirlwind of punches and kicks, smashing through furniture as each sought to beat the other into bloody submission. All around them the tribunal chamber descended into a maelstrom of violence, as Voth soldiers opened fire on the few guards still standing. Alien delegates screamed and dove for cover, only to be ruthlessly cut down by stray pulse bolts. But Henry was oblivious to the chaos erupting around him. His entire universe had narrowed to Karos, to the feeling of his fists hammering into the Voth's hide, to the savage joy of finally getting to grips with his hated foe. 20 years of grief and loss and rage poured out of Henry as he fought, empowering him, driving him to batter through Karos's defenses, to repay every hurt 100-fold. The Voth commander reeled as Henry's assault redoubled, his earlier arrogance draining away, replaced by something that might almost have been fear. Shattered glass and splintered wood crunched under booted feet as Henry and Karos smashed through the tribunal chamber, trading earth-shattering blows. The other alien delegates dove for cover behind overturned tables and shattered pillars as stray shots from the fierce firefight between the Voth and the guards zipped perilously close. Henry ducked a vicious roundhouse from Karos, the Voth's talons whistling past his ear. He drove his fist into Karos's midsection, feeling the satisfying crunch of cracking ribs. But Karos absorbed the blow and retaliated viciously, slamming his elbow into Henry's temple. Stars exploded across Henry's vision. He staggered back, shaking his head to clear it. Through blurred eyes, Henry saw Karos reach into his belt and draw forth a glowing plasma dagger, its edges shimmering with deadly heat. The Voth commander lunged, slashing the blade across Henry's chest. Searing agony erupted in Henry's torso as the superheated edge parted his flesh, the stench of his own burning meat filling his nostrils. Henry stumbled back with a cry of pain, one hand clutching the cauterized gash. Karos pressed his advantage, raining down blows from his dagger in a whirlwind of slashes. Henry barely managed to evade the worst of them, the blade scoring his arms and shoulders as he desperately fought to create distance. Karos's eyes glinted with savage glee as he bore down on Henry, driving him back with relentless swipes of his dagger. Henry ducked and weaved, looking for an opening, but Karos was too fast. The Voth's blade darted in again. Henry threw up his arm to block, and screamed as the superheated plasma ate through his combat suit and into the meat of his forearm. The pain galvanized Henry. As Karos drew back for another slash, Henry surged forward inside his guard. He caught the Voth's wrist in an iron grip, grappling for control of the deadly blade. Karos snarled and strained against him, the two combatants locked in a desperate struggle. Henry gritted his teeth and dug deep, calling upon every last ounce of strength. Slowly, tortuously, he forced Karos's arm back, angling the blade away from his body. Karos's eyes widened in disbelief as he felt his own arm being inexorably turned against him. Seizing his chance, Henry reared back and cracked his forehead against Karos's with a sickening crunch. The Voth reeled, his grip loosening for a split second. It was all Henry needed. He wrenched the dagger free, reversed it, and plunged it to the hilt in Karos's throat. Karos's eyes bulged in shock. He gurgled horribly, black blood spurting from his mouth as he clawed at the embedded blade. Henry twisted it savagely, then ripped it free in a spray of gore. Karos collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut, life fading from his eyes as he spasmed and went still in a spreading pool of his own blood. Breathing hard, Henry snatched Karos's communicator from the dead Voth's belt. He activated it and shouted, "Valdez! The Voth Armada is coming. Earth is their target." Only static answered him. Cursing, Henry switched to a fleet-wide frequency. "This is Captain Henry to any Earth ships in range. The Voth have broken the treaty. Converge on Sol and prepare to defend Earth." Again, no response. The channels remained ominously silent. Desperate, Henry punched in the encrypted resistance frequency he had used to coordinate with Jacon and the Krill freedom fighters. "This is Henry. If any free krill still live, the Voth have turned their greed toward Earth. Aid us now, and we can end their thrall forever." For a heart-stopping moment, the channel hissed with empty static. Then blessedly a voice crackled from the speaker. "Captain Henry, this is Kalora. My mother served with you and Jacon. We feared the krill fires had gone cold forever, but if you still light the way, the free krill will fly with you once more." Henry nearly wept with relief. "Kalora, thank the stars, the Voth are—" A lance of searing light zipped over Henry's shoulder, close enough to singe his hair. He cursed and dropped into a combat crouch, taking cover behind the wreckage of the dais as the Voth troopers renewed their attack. The Tribunal guards were in full retreat now, falling back before the onslaught of superior firepower. Henry shouted into the communicator, "I've got to warn Earth, can you boost this signal?" "Transmitting on Terran emergency channels now," Kalora responded, her voice tight with concentration. Henry raised his voice to be heard over the cacophony of battle. "This is Captain Henry to Earth Defense Command. The Voth are coming in force. Do not trust Admiral Valdez, I repeat. Do not trust Valdez. The Voth have turned him. He's—" A searing blast from a Voth sonic cannon impacted inches from Henry's face. He felt the skin on his cheek blister from the proximity, even as the communicator disintegrated into molten slag, the transmission cutting to static. Henry hurled the useless device away with a curse, praying to the stars that his desperate warning had gotten through. Laser blasts stitched a burning line across the floor as the Voth troopers advanced, forcing Henry to duck lower. He scanned the chamber, looking for some way out of this death trap. His gaze fell on the Tribunal chairman, cowering behind the cover of a bullet-riddled desk. A desperate plan formed in Henry's mind. He gauged the distance, plotted his route. Then, scooping a fallen guard's sidearm from the rubble, he exploded from cover in a mad sprint. The Voth soldiers zeroed in on him instantly. Bolts of superheated plasma flew around him as he zigzagged and rolled, the shots passing so close he could feel their heat through his combat suit. Chunks of blasted masonry exploded around him as he vaulted over the last barricade and skidded to a halt beside the terrified chairman. Henry seized the alien official by the frills of his robe, hauling him close and jamming the muzzle of his gun beneath the quivering folds of the chairman's chin. "If you want to live," Henry growled, his eyes boring into the chairman's terror-widened ones. "Call your ship and tell them to prep for emergency evac. Now." The chairman nodded so frantically his jowls wobbled. His trembling hands scrabbled at his robes, fumbling for his personal communicator. Henry dragged the protesting chairman down the smoke-choked corridor of the Tribunal station, using the spluttering alien as a living shield. The barrel of his stolen sidearm, still warm from the firefight in the chamber, pressed into the fleshy folds of the chairman's neck. Alarms wailed, emergency lights strobing hellishly. With a rumble of heavy machinery, blast doors began slamming down one by one, attempting to isolate the fleeing human and his hostage. Henry pushed harder, ignoring the chairman's wheezing protests. Up ahead, the final blast door was grinding closed. Henry hurled himself forward, dragging the chairman, barely clearing the thick duralloy slab as it thundered shut. Voth soldiers hammered on the other side, their furious shouts muffled. The docking bay was chaos, ships frantically launching as news of the Voth attack spread. A sleek silver shuttle emblazoned with diplomatic markings settled onto the deck, ramp extending. Henry charged up the ramp, heaving the gasping chairman through the hatch. He slapped the controls sealing the shuttle, just as a barrage of plasma bolts pinged off the hull. "Strap in," Henry snapped, dumping the chairman unceremoniously into a seat as he sprinted for the cockpit. He threw himself at the controls, fingers flying over unfamiliar displays and readouts. The engines surged to life, and the deck lurched as the shuttle vaulted into the air. It smashed through the docking bay's force field into the void of space, hull groaning at the sudden decompression. A squadron of Voth fighters boiled out of the station's launch tubes in pursuit, their reptilian pilots howling for blood. Sizzling plasma stitched the shuttle's shields, alarms shrieking as the barriers drained precipitously. Henry wrenched the control yoke, sending the shuttle into a gut-churning spiral. G-forces crushed him into the padded seat. A few shots still slipped through, one sparking off the nose, another slagging the port sublights. The nav computer sputtered out in a fountain of sparks, displays going dark. Flying blind and outgunned, Henry bared his teeth and punched the throttle to full. The engines screamed as he pitted velocity against the Voth's superior maneuverability. Suddenly space lit up with detonations, missiles corkscrewing through the Voth formation. Fighters spun away trailing smoke, some erupting into short-lived novas of flame and debris. "Looked like you could use a hand, Captain," a familiar voice crackled over the comms. Kalora's sleek raider swooped into view, pacing the shuttle. "We stand with you, Henry, as you once stood with us." More krill ships snapped out of warp, fresh and hungry for battle. They tore into the remaining Voth fighters, massed fire shredding the enemy ships. The raiders formed a protective cordon around Henry's battered vessel. Henry sagged back, exhaustion hitting him like a hammer, then pushed himself up. He stalked back to the passenger compartment. The chairman cringed as Henry loomed over him. Henry smiled, cold and sharp. "Now then, I believe it's time we had a little chat about what the legitimate galactic authorities are going to do to stop the Voth." The chairman swallowed hard, but some steel crept into his spine. He met Henry's gaze levelly. "The Tribunal may have been premature in its judgment of you, Captain Henry. It seems we don't know the full story after all." He took a deep, shuddering breath, then squared his narrow shoulders. "Tell us what you need." The Krill command ship's war room buzzed with tension as Henry laid out his audacious plan. Hollow displays flickered with enemy fleet dispositions and potential attack vectors. The chairman shifted uneasily, his face pale. "Captain Henry, surely you're not suggesting—" Henry cut him off with a sharp gesture. "I am. The Voth will be expecting us to hunker down and defend Earth. They're counting on it. But if we hit them where they live, throw their whole strategy into disarray." Kalora leaned forward, her compound eyes gleaming. "We strike at the heart of the Voth Empire itself." Henry nodded grimly. "Exactly. They've gotten away with this for so long because nobody's had the guts to take the fight to them. Well, I say no more. It's time we show them that their actions have consequences." The chairman swallowed hard. "The Tribunal fleets, we're not a warlike people, Captain. We may not—" Henry's eyes bored into him. "I'm not asking you to win this war for us, Chairman. I'm asking you to help us end it. Commit whatever ships you can spare. The Krill will carry the bulk of the fighting, but we need to show the Voth a united front, that they don't get to dictate terms anymore." After a long moment, the chairman nodded slowly. "Very well, Captain. The Tribunal will stand with you. May the gods grant us victory." Kalora placed a slender hand on Henry's shoulder. "The Free Krill are with you, Henry. To whatever end, we will avenge Jacon and all our fallen together." As the room dissolved into a flurry of activity, officers rushing to coordinate the patchwork fleet, a priority message pinged on the central display. Henry frowned and tapped the accept key. Admiral Valdez's haggard face filled the screen. "Captain Henry, I received your message. I don't know what to say." Henry's jaw clenched. "How about you start with the truth, Admiral? When did the Voth turn you?" Valdez flinched as if struck. He couldn't meet Henry's accusing stare. "They didn't turn me, Henry. They broke me." His voice shook. "After you went rogue, I tried to find a diplomatic solution with the Voth. I thought if we could just reach an understanding—" He trailed off, visibly gathering himself. "I was a fool. The Voth only understand force. When I went to meet with them, they took me prisoner, tortured me for weeks. I held out as long as I could, but—" Valdez finally met Henry's gaze, his eyes haunted. "I told them everything, Henry. Our defenses, our strategies, our weaknesses. God help me, I betrayed us all." Henry's fists tightened until his knuckles whitened, but when he spoke, his voice was steady. "Then help make it right, Admiral. The Voth Armada is headed for Earth, but they're flying into a trap. We're going to hit them at home, and we need every ship we can get." Valdez nodded slowly, a tiny spark of his old resolve rekindling. I can't make up for what I've done, but I can damn well try." You'll have every ship I can muster, Henry. Give them hell. The void above the Voth homeworld erupted into chaos as the ragtag Allied fleet burst from warp, weapons already blazing. Cobbled together from Terran battlecruisers, Krill raiders, and a hodgepodge of Tribunal vessels, it was a force born of desperation and united by a single purpose: the utter destruction of the Voth war machine. Voth orbital gun platforms and defense monitors opened up instantly, filling space with crisscrossing webs of incandescent death. The lighter Krill ships jinked and juked, drawing fire while the heavy Terran ships ploughed forward, their thick armor shrugging off hits that would have gutted lesser craft. Tribunal ships darted through the fray, jamming Voth sensors and communications, sowing confusion in the ranks, but the Voth recovered quickly, their own dreadnoughts rumbling from their berths, weapon ports sliding open to unleash blistering broadsides. The invaders' formation buckled under the onslaught, ships pinwheeling away trailing smoke and debris. A Terran cruiser, its bridge sheared away by a lucky shot, rammed a Voth destroyer, both ships vanishing in an eye-searing fireball. Kalora's flagship shuddered as a plasma torpedo detonated off its bow, alarms shrieking as the shield struggled to dissipate the energy. On the bridge, Henry clung to a sparking console as the deck heaved beneath him. "Forward batteries target those gun platforms," Henry barked. "Take some heat off our ships." The Krill crew leapt to obey, the ship's prow erupting with searing lances of light. 2 orbital platforms crumbled under the barrage, fireballs quickly snuffed by the pitiless vacuum. But for every Voth ship or gun destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. The Voth warships were simply too big, too heavily armed and armored. The Allied fleet was giving all it had, fighting with desperate skill and courage, but it wasn't enough. They were losing. Henry watched a wing of Krill raiders disappear under a fusillade of plasma fire, his heart sinking. He keyed the fleet channel. "This is Henry. All ships, rally on me. We're punching through no matter the cost. We have to take out their command center." Acknowledgements crackled back, shot through with static. The remnants of the Allied fleet clumped together, Terran and Krill and Tribunal, battered but unbroken. As one, they surged forward, plunging into the teeth of the Voth defenses, trading lives for inches but not slowing. Henry's eyes never left the tactical display, watching their losses mount, praying it would be enough. It had to be. The alternative was unthinkable. The Voth ships loomed before them, a wall of iron and spite, pouring out a storm of fire that seemed to fill the very cosmos. The Allied fleet punched into that hurricane of destruction with the fury of the damned, ships flashing into brief, brilliant novas with every second. But they did not stop. Would not stop. They had come too far, sacrificed too much to fail now. So they flew on into the maelstrom, determined that if they were to meet their end this day, they would do so with their teeth in the Voth's throat. The Voth dreadnought loomed before Henry's battered ship, its weapons glowing with deadly intent. Henry gripped the control yoke, his knuckles white, as he wrenched the ship into a desperate corkscrew, but it was too late. A searing beam of plasma lanced out from the dreadnought, spearing through shields and hull like tissue paper. The bridge exploded in a maelstrom of sparks and flames, consoles detonating and bulkheads crumpling. Henry was hurled from his chair, slamming into the deck with bone-crushing force. Pain exploded through his body, his vision flashing red. Klaxons shrieked as acrid smoke billowed through the shattered bridge. Coughing and choking, Henry dragged himself up, every movement sending fresh agony ripping through him. The ship shuddered and groaned around him, the deck pitching wildly. Through the cracked viewport, Henry saw Voth ships swarming like angry hornets, hammering the beleaguered Allied fleet with salvo after salvo. His heart seized. They were losing. The Voth were too many, too strong. Gritting his teeth, Henry staggered to the escape pod, leaving a trail of blood in his wake. He practically fell into the cramped capsule, slamming the launch button with a shaking, slick red hand. The pod blasted free of the dying ship, just as another volley of plasma beams scythed through the hull. Henry watched through the tiny porthole as his faithful vessel erupted into a miniature sun, a funeral pyre for the brave crew who had followed him to hell and back. The pod spiraled towards the Voth homeworld, buffeted by anti-aircraft fire and the shock waves of exploding ships. Henry braced himself as the capsule screamed through the atmosphere, friction turning the exterior to molten slag. With a bone-jarring crunch, the pod slammed into the surface, ploughing a deep furrow into the war-torn earth. Henry kicked the hatch open and crawled from the wreckage, his whole body a symphony of pain. The twisted, smouldering remains of a sprawling Voth military complex rose before him, the heart of the enemy's war machine. In the distance, the Allied fleet waged a desperate holding action against the Voth counterattack, the sky alight with crisscrossing beams and blossoming fireballs. Henry knew they couldn't last long, but they had bought him a chance, however slim. Grimacing, he reached back into the pod, pulling free a battered but functional plasma rifle. Slinging the weapon over his shoulder, Henry limped towards the ruined complex, a lone human bearing the weight of worlds on his bloody, battered shoulders. Voth soldiers swarmed amidst the rubble-strewn corridors, frantically mobilizing to repel the Allied assault. Henry ambushed them in small groups, his rifle spitting star-hot bolts of plasma. Voth after Voth crumpled, their chests smouldering holes. Henry fought like a man possessed, his face a rictus snarl of pain and determination. He had to reach the command bunker, had to cut the head off the serpent. Nothing else mattered, not his wounds, not his exhaustion, not the ever-increasing odds stacked against him. Jukon's face flashed before his eyes, then Kalora's, his brother, his parents, the chairman, Valdez. Everyone who had suffered under the Voth, everyone who was counting on him. He couldn't, wouldn't, fail them. Step by blood-soaked step, Henry delved deeper into the complex, leaving a trail of Voth bodies in his wake. Alarms shrieked, and emergency lights flashed hellish red as he neared the heart of the facility. With a final burst of fading strength, Henry shouldered through a set of massive blast doors, storming into the command center. The Voth High Command whirled to face him, shock and fear writ large on their reptilian faces. Henry was a vision out of nightmare, his armor scorched and perforated, his skin caked with blood and soot, his eyes blazing with righteous fury. He leveled his rifle at the wizened Voth regent, a millennia of arrogance and cruelty personified. "You dare invade the sanctum of the Voth?" the regent hissed, drawing himself up. "You, a mere human." Henry squeezed the trigger. The regent's head vanished in a spray of superheated gore, his decapitated corpse toppling from the throne. The other Voth stood frozen in shock for a split second. Henry didn't hesitate. He opened fire, sweeping the room with a barrage of plasma bolts. Voth after Voth fell, their chests and heads blown open, until only Henry remained standing amidst the carnage. Breathing hard, Henry staggered to the communications console. He jabbed a sequence of keys overriding the system, broadcasting on all frequencies, to the Voth fleet, to the Allied ships, to the entire planet below. "Soldiers of the Voth," Henry said, his voice rough with pain and exhaustion, "your leaders are dead. Your homeworld is fallen. You have been deceived by those who claimed to be your masters, but it is not too late to choose a different path." He took a shuddering breath. "Lay down your weapons, surrender, and you will be treated with fairness and mercy. But if you continue to fight, you will be destroyed utterly. The choice is yours." Henry cut the transmission. He keyed in another set of commands, accessing the base's reactor controls. With grim purpose, he set the system to overload, a runaway chain reaction building to a cataclysmic release. The bunker and the entire complex would be reduced to atoms. Nothing would remain of the Voth's cruelest tools of oppression and conquest. Alarms blared anew as Henry fought his way back to the surface, his steps increasingly leaden, his vision blurring at the edges. By the time he reached his battered escape pod, he was leaving a dripping trail of crimson in his wake, his shredded body held together only by the iron force of his will. Henry collapsed into the pod, his trembling, blood-slick hands scrabbling over the controls. The hatch sealed and the capsule lurched into the air, thrusters straining to escape the inexorable pull of gravity. With a sound like the ending of worlds, the reactor detonated, an expanding sphere of incandescent destruction consuming the complex, chasing the pod into the stratosphere. From orbit, Henry watched the Voth homeworld burn, vast swathes of its surface obscured by continent-spanning firestorms. Voth ships broke off their attack on the battered Allied fleet, fleeing back to their stricken world in droves. Some, perhaps, moved by Henry's final ultimatum, others, desperate to render aid to their people below. It mattered little. The battle, the war, was won. As the adrenaline drained away, and the pod's meager store of medigel depleted, Henry became aware of a sharp, insistent pain in his side. Glancing down, he saw the jagged shard of metal protruding from his abdomen, just below his ribs. A slowly spreading pool of crimson stained his torn pressure suit. With numb, fumbling fingers, Henry reached for the medkit, but his strength failed him. The case tumbled from his grasp, its contents scattering across the pod's floor. Darkness crept in at the edges of Henry's vision as he slumped back in his seat, his ragged breathing echoing in his helmet. He thought of Earth, the soft blue of its skies, the gentle give of its soil, of the krill, their iridescent beauty, their yearning for freedom, of Jikon and Kalora, comrades in arms bound by a promise sealed in blood, of all those who had fought and bled and died to break the chains of Voth tyranny. "I'm sorry," Henry whispered, his voice a thready rasp. "I'm so sorry." Images flashed through his fading consciousness. Valdez, broken by Voth torture but determined to make amends. The Voth regent's sneering face, contorted in cruel amusement. His crew, loyal to the end, consigned to the void. "I did what I had to do," Henry murmured, his eyes drifting shut. "May the galaxy forgive me." And with a final rattling exhalation, Captain John Henry, scourge of the Voth, liberator of worlds, the man who had sacrificed everything to change the course of history, breathed his last. His battered body went still, his Herculean task complete, though the cost had been higher than he ever could have conceived. The pod drifted, a tiny speck amidst the titanic graveyard of broken ships and shattered dreams that littered the orbit of the Voth homeworld. On the planet's surface, Voth soldiers laid down their arms, surrendering by the millions, their martial spirit broken along with their cruel empire. In the void above, Terran, Krill, and Tribunal ships gathered, triumphant but battered, forever bonded by shared sacrifice. The war was over. The Voth hegemony was no more. But the galaxy had been forever altered. The course of civilizations shifted onto a new and uncertain path. In the years to come, the Tribunal races would step into the breach, seeking to forge a new order from the ashes of the old. The Krill would take their place among the stars, no longer cowering in fear, but striding forward as equals. And humanity, bloodied but unbroken, would emerge from the crucible of war changed, a people who had stared into the abyss and refused to blink. The galaxy would never be the same, and it had Captain John Henry, for better or worse, to thank for it. The galaxy had changed in the decades since Captain John Henry's sacrifice, but not entirely for the better. The Voth's defeat left a power vacuum that the Tribunal races rushed to fill, each vying for dominance in the new order. Old rivalries and ambitions, once held in check by the threat of the Voth, now resurfaced with a vengeance. Humanity, meanwhile, was still reeling from the devastation of the Voth War. Earth had been saved, but at a terrible cost. Entire cities lay in ruins, billions had perished, and the once mighty fleets of the United Earth Space Forces were reduced to a shadow of their former strength. In the face of such loss, many humans struggled to find purpose and hope. But there were those who clung to the memory of John Henry and the ideals for which he had fought and died. Inspired by his sacrifice, thousands of young men and women flocked to the ranks of the newly formed Galactic Peacekeepers, a multinational force established by the Tribunal to maintain stability and prevent the rise of another hegemonic power like the Voth. Among these fresh-faced recruits was Sarah Hawkins, a prodigy whose tactical acumen and leadership potential had marked her for greatness from an early age. Like many of her generation, Sarah had grown up idolizing John Henry as a paragon of courage and selflessness. She had devoured every scrap of information about his exploits, from his daring raid on the Voth breeding facilities to his final fateful stand aboard the Retribution. In Henry's example, Sarah saw the model of what a soldier should be: a defender of the weak, a champion of justice, a bulwark against tyranny. She had joined the peacekeepers to follow in his footsteps, to help forge the better future he had died for. Rising quickly through the ranks, Sarah soon found herself in command of her own ship, the GSS Dauntless. Her crew was a motley assortment of humans, krill, and other tribunal species, united by their commitment to the peacekeeper ideal. Together, they patrolled the fractious borders of tribunal space, responding to distress calls, mediating disputes, and occasionally putting down the odd pirate incursion or separatist uprising. It was challenging work but rewarding. Sarah felt she was making a difference, however small. She was helping to hold the line against the forces of chaos and destruction that always threatened the fragile galactic peace. But as the months turned into years, Sarah began to notice troubling patterns. Whispers of covert tribunal operations in the neutral zones, unexplained disappearances of key diplomats and politicians, fluctuations in the flow of critical resources, promethium, dilithium, quantium-40, that hinted at something more than simple market forces at work. Puzzled, Sarah started digging deeper, using her security clearance to access restricted peacekeeper files. What she found shocked her to the core. Far from being a united front, the tribunal races were engaged in a shadowy Cold War, each maneuvering against the others in a high-stakes game of espionage and sabotage. Proxy conflicts flared on a dozen worlds as the tribunal powers funneled weapons and resources to favored factions, seeking to shape the political landscape to their advantage. Meanwhile, a clandestine arms race raged as each species rushed to develop newer and deadlier weapons, heedless of the risk of mutual annihilation. Even more disturbing were the files Sarah uncovered relating to John Henry's final mission: inconsistencies in the official reports, redacted passages hinting at a deeper mystery, and a fragment of decoded transmission sent in the clear from a tribunal ship mere minutes before the Retribution's destruction. "Cease and desist, Henry. You know not the forces you meddle with." The implications were staggering. If the message was genuine, if her childhood hero had not died by chance but by design, then everything Sarah thought she knew was a lie. The tribunal, the peacekeepers, the very cause to which she had devoted her life, all of it was rotten to the core. Sarah knew she couldn't turn a blind eye, couldn't pretend she hadn't seen what she had seen. John Henry wouldn't have stood for such corruption, and neither would she. But Sarah also knew she couldn't take on the entrenched powers of the galaxy alone. She needed allies, people she could trust absolutely, people who shared her conviction that the dream of a just and peaceful galaxy was worth fighting for, no matter the odds. One by one, Sarah gathered them to her side. Zoral, her krill first officer, whose people had never forgotten the debt they owed to John Henry. Adisa, the soft-spoken Zalosian engineer, who had lost her entire family to the Voth's cruelty. Jang, the impassive Veloxian sniper, who had spent his youth in a Voth labor camp before being liberated by Henry's raiders. Kirsten, the quick-witted human pilot who had grown up on stories of the Retribution's exploits. Together, they formed the core of a new resistance, a clandestine network of like-minded individuals determined to expose the tribunal's hypocrisy and hold them accountable for their crimes. They called themselves the Watchmen, after the old Earth saying, "Who watches the Watchman?" Operating from the shadows, the Watchmen waged a secret war against the architects of the galaxy's suffering. They intercepted coded transmissions, leaked damning evidence to the press, sabotaged weapons shipments, and inserted disinformation into the tribunal's intelligence networks. Slowly but surely they began to turn the tide, sowing doubt and dissension among the ranks of their enemies. But such a threat could not go unanswered forever. The tribunal's retaliation, when it came, was swift and brutal. The Watchmen found themselves branded as terrorists and traitors, their assets seized, their safe houses raided. One by one, their allies were arrested or disappeared, until only Sarah and her crew remained hunted and desperate. In a last desperate gambit, Sarah rallied the remaining Watchmen, for a strike against a secret Tribunal weapons lab hidden in the heart of an asteroid field. If the intelligence they'd gathered was correct, the facility was the key to the Tribunal's latest doomsday device. A fleet of automated battleships, each one armed with a singularity cannon capable of destroying entire planets. If the Tribunal deployed such a weapon, it would mean the end of the galactic peace, a return to the darkest days of the Voth's rule. Sarah couldn't let that happen. She wouldn't let John Henry's sacrifice be in vain. But the Tribunal had been waiting for them. As the Dauntless emerged from warp at the edge of the asteroid field, they found themselves surrounded by a massive Tribunal fleet, a wall of guns and armor bristling with menace. The Dauntless was outgunned and outclassed in every way. Sarah knew they had no chance of victory, but perhaps if they were very lucky and very brave, they might still be able to complete their mission. She turned to her crew, her friends, her comrades in arms. In their eyes, she saw the same determination, the same unwavering resolve that had sustained them through so many trials. "We all knew this day might come," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear that clawed at her heart. "We knew the risks when we signed on for this fight, but we also knew what was at stake, the soul of the galaxy itself, the dream of a future free from fear and oppression." She paused, swallowing past the sudden lump in her throat. John Henry once said that the price of freedom is always high. Today we pay that price. Today we make sure his sacrifice was not in vain. Sarah turned to Kirsten. "Plot a course straight for the heart of that asteroid field. We're going to ram that facility with everything we've got." Kirsten nodded grimly, her fingers flying over the helm controls. The Dauntless surged forward, engines roaring as the Tribunal ships opened fire. The shields flared and sparked under the onslaught, alarms shrieking as the hull buckled and strained. But the Dauntless did not falter. Weaving and juking, the battered ship plunged into the swirling maelstrom of rock and ice, the Tribunal vessels in hot pursuit. Cannon fire and missile detonations lit the void as the combatants dueled amidst the tumbling asteroids. Sarah knew they would never be able to break through its defenses, not with the Dauntless crippled and failing, not with the Tribunal fleet closing in for the kill. In that instant, she saw the only path forward, the only way to ensure the mission's success. She turned to Zoral, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Zoral, I need you to take the rest of the crew and get to the escape pods. Jettison at the last possible moment. The Tribunal will be too focused on us to hunt you down." Zoral shook his head, mandibles clicking in agitation. "Captain, no, we won't abandon you. We're in this together to the end." Sarah clasped his shoulder, her grip fierce. "The mission is what matters, Zoral. Someone has to carry on the fight after we're gone. Someone has to make sure the truth gets out. That duty falls to you now." She looked around at the rest of her crew, her gaze lingering on each beloved face. "It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve with you all. I could not have asked for truer friends or braver comrades." Kirsten, eyes bright with tears, reached out and gripped Sarah's hand. "Give 'em hell, Captain. We'll make sure the galaxy knows what you did here today." One by one, the crew filed out, each pausing to embrace Sarah or offer a final word of farewell. Then she was alone on the bridge, the ship shuddering and groaning around her as the last of her crew made their escape. Sarah slid into the pilot's seat, her hands steady on the controls. On the view screen, the weapons lab loomed before her, a malevolent spider crouched at the heart of its web. She could see the launch bays now, the rows of doomsday ships waiting to be unleashed upon an unsuspecting galaxy. "Not today," Sarah whispered, "not ever." She coaxed every last erg of power from the straining engines, aiming the Dauntless like a spear at the heart of the Tribunal's monstrous creation. Weapons fire sleeted across the failing shields, alarms shrieking, hull plates buckling and tearing away. But Sarah's course never wavered. In the final moments, as the weapons lab rushed up to fill the viewscreen and the reactor's containment field began to fail, Sarah's thoughts turned to John Henry. She pictured his face as she had seen it so many times in hollows and history books, stern and commanding, yet alight with the inner fire of his convictions. "I understand now," she whispered, even as the first cracks appeared in the reactor casing and tendrils of straw-colored plasma began to lick across the bridge. "I understand the price you paid, the burden you bore. I only hope I've made you proud." Sarah thought of her crew, the watchmen, the brave men and women who had followed her into this last desperate fight. She thought of the galaxy she had sworn to defend, the trillions of lives she had hoped to save. She knew that her sacrifice would not be the end of the struggle, that the battle for the galaxy's soul would go on long after she was gone. But she also knew that she had made a difference, that she had kept the flame of hope alive, if only for a little while longer. That she had honored the memory of the man who had inspired her, the hero who had shown her what it meant to stand for something greater than oneself. As the viewscreen flared white and the reactor containment failed completely, Sarah closed her eyes, a faint smile on her lips. Her last thought was a prayer, a final plea to the universe itself. "Let them remember," she whispered. "Let them remember what we fought for. Let them remember that there's always hope, as long as there are those willing to fight for it." Then the world dissolved in fire and light, and Sarah Hawkins, peacekeeper and watchman, passed into legend. The galaxy would never be the same. The destruction of the weapons lab sent shockwaves through the fragile web of alliances and power structures that held the Tribunal together. Some saw Sarah's actions as a heroic sacrifice, a final defiant stand against the forces of tyranny and oppression. Others condemned her as a reckless extremist, a dangerous fanatic who had nearly plunged the galaxy back into war. But one thing was certain. Sarah's death had reignited the spark of resistance that John Henry had first kindled all those years ago. Across the galaxy, people whispered her name as a symbol of hope and defiance. The Watchmen, once hunted and reviled, found new allies and new purpose in the wake of their leader's martyrdom. The Tribunal, weakened and divided, struggled to maintain its grip on power. Some of the more moderate factions, chastened by the near catastrophe of the weapons lab, began to push for reform and transparency. Others, hardened by fear and paranoia, redoubled their efforts to stamp out dissent and consolidate their control. The galaxy teetered on the brink of a new era, poised between the forces of change and the inertia of the status quo. No one could say for certain what the future would hold, what new challenges and dangers lurked in the vast, uncharted reaches of space. But one thing was clear: the legacy of heroes like John Henry and Sarah Hawkins would endure, a shining beacon of courage and sacrifice in an uncertain universe. Their memory would inspire generations to come, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there were always those who would stand up and fight for what was right. The stars wheel overhead, ancient and indifferent as the galaxy holds its breath, waiting to see what the next chapter of its story will bring. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.